Today we're going to try answer the long unanswered question of are Chinese off-road vehicles and motorbikes any good?
A lot of people seem to think that Chinese bikes and power sports are rubbish because they don't last very long. Some of them don't last very long, some of them do. It depends which ones you get. Companies like CF Moto have been making quads and bikes for a while now, and they're getting recognised by some big creators on YouTube, and they seem to have good build quality. But companies like Tao Motors, they're not the greatest.
No.
Like our old quads that we had, parts of it are still sitting up there, and they were great.
The one thing that I must say about Chinese vehicles is parts are really cheap, so they're really cheap to run and repair.
Yep.
As long as you know what you're doing, they're pretty good, but if you don't know what you're doing, they're a bloody nightmare. Their quality control is not great at all, that's for sure.
No, but for the quality that you get, you pay the same price.
Yeah.
I picked up my first road bike on Friday, and it was 850 quid, and I got this 12,000 mile Lexmoto Viper. Picture of it will be put up there, and it's been great. Got it for 3 days. I've ridden it a few times, and it's good. It feels good. There's a bit of play in the throttle. There's a bit of play in the gear stick, but it's what you expect when you buy a 12,000 mile Chinese bike. But it's actually in really good condition.
Yeah. And for like an old, like the Honda version of that, you'd be paying more than double, and it'd be so old and worn out by then.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the Honda equivalent would be the CBF 125F, and they're alright bikes. They're reliable.
I guess one thing one might be worried about when one gets a road legal Chinese bike is breaking down. I mean, it is a risk one takes for the price one gets with it. I guess your Honda will never break down, but you are paying a fortune to get on the road, and there's something a bit fun about having cheap and easy to do.
The thing with the Hondas are, yeah, you're paying a lot more out the door price, and it's still a Honda, but you're not guaranteed to not break down in the middle of nowhere.
I guess the riding experience isn't much different.
It's not. But with the higher quality builds, like from Honda, Suzuki, Kawasaki, you get finer tolerances in the engines especially, and therefore you get more power. In my new Lexmoto, it's got about 11 horse. That's going to get changed very soon though. Stay tuned for that video. But stock, it's around about 11 horse, and it's not great, but it's a 125, and you can't expect much more. But yeah, I have seen models that are 15 horse, so it's reachable.
Yeah.
CDI maps and whatever, which we did to my quad actually.
There's
the rev limiter up.
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of aftermarket Chinese cheap upgrades or whatever modifications one can do to these things.
Yeah. There's aftermarket upgrades, but it's all eBay. There's no official aftermarket companies that will supply bits for Chinese
And usually
bikes.
you get a part and it has to be always slightly modified for it to work. So as long as one's pretty mechanically minded and one doesn't mind doing a little budging somewhere, I think pretty good.
A lot of the time the metals that they use aren't the highest of quality, like we've seen on your retro classic. Been sitting over the winter and then it's rusted a lot. It's been cleaned up a lot, so well done. But a Honda would not have done that.
Yeah.
We'll say that.
Yeah, because I got it with 73 miles, basically brand new, and only £500, and I don't think one can beat the price like that, because the real deal, the Honda SS50, you'd be charged around £2,000 for that.
Yeah, one in bad condition. They're really expensive, because I did have a look, and they're very expensive. And there's not a lot of bike there, and for spending that amount of money, you'd definitely be better getting something else.
Yeah.
Or you spend 500 quid and get a Nang fan that might break down sometimes. You just never know.
And considering living prices are getting so high, one doesn't always have so much to spend on a vehicle. So I think maybe Chinese vehicles could be the way to go nowadays.
I'd make a point about insurance, because your insurance is quite cheap on this. I ran a quote on a fairly well-known comparison site. Quoted 15,000 a year for a 125, which is ridiculous. I'm 17, and that is, it's too much. Nobody's going to pay that.
Never.
It's out of the window. I got another quote for 1,600 on another site, but that's not the point. The point was I put in all my details, and because it had a Black Widow exhaust, which I did not put on, I'm not one of those 125 riders, but it was 15,000, and I took the exhaust off the insurance quote, and it went down to only 2,500, which is still ridiculous.
Yeah, that's insane.
But I think for the most part, Chinese vehicles are a lot cheaper to insure. I got a quote on a Leximoto LXR, and that was 1,200 a year, which is pretty good for somebody our age.
Yeah. For insurance wise for this, it's only a 50cc, but I paid only £280, and I think that's the cheapest riding you can get with a £500 bike and £300 insurance basically. So
definitely cheaper than what some adults pay for their bikes.
Yeah.
Even cars with 30 years no claims.
To fully get on the road with a £200 CBT, £500 bike and a £300 insurance, that's £1,000 and you're fully on the road, and I think that's a pretty good deal nowadays.
You can't beat that.
Yeah.
Basically, is
because for young riders to get nowadays on the road, it's getting very hard and tricky.
Yeah. Wiring on Chinese machines is not the highest of quality, again to say the least, but everybody knows that. You don't buy a Chinese bike expecting it to last years and years.
I would say you don't touch the loom, you just replace it.
Yeah, there's no point messing about with it, because if you touch it wrong, it's going to break. On my old quad that I had, the picture of it up here, the starter wasn't working, and so we took it apart into the actual hand controls on the bars. Sort of something popped out, we clipped it back in, it's fine, and then the battery died. I'm not sure why. Maybe that was user error, maybe I left the ignition on for a night, I don't know, but the stator then also failed to charge the battery. So that's another thing that was wrong, because I just had to bump start it everywhere. Because surely you'd think when you bump start it and have the engine running, the stator charges the battery.
Yeah.
But evidently not what happened there. I'm not sure why it was like that, but the electric starter wanted to work sometimes, it didn't want to work other times.
Temperamental.
Yeah, definitely. It was a lot easier to just put the back end up and throw it down in gear and it would work. But I had no other issues with it other than that.
I guess it gives it some character though.
Yeah, it provided for some good memories. Yeah, the rust on them is there's quite a lot of it. We stripped my quad down completely and rebuilt it.
The paint quality is so poor that it just gets eaten off. Another question that a lot of people ask is, are Chinese machines, or specifically dirt bikes, any good for racing?
I've seen a lot of stuff online about people taking them around the track, and obviously if you buy a 250cc dirt bike from Amazon, it's not going to be any good up against a KXF 250, because the build quality is just not the same. Tolerances in the motor aren't the same. The KX is going to be a lot faster.
I'd say that's where the Chinese stuff starts to show, where when you're coming down to competition racing or something, well, you have to have specific requirements and you can't have any margin for error.
I think if you're going racing anyway and you've got enough money to pay for your entries for the track, you can afford an extra 1,000 maybe for a better bike that won't break down.
Yeah, so I'd say on that subject, your good old brands are better for racing and professional competition, but I'd say for trail riding and when you're out and about in the woods with your pals, I'd say Chinese bike actually might be a pretty good way to get out there.
I think a lot of people will buy Chinese bikes and then treating them like a baby. You may as well run them wide open all the time, because if you do end up blowing it up, a new top end's going to be 50 quid. It's not the end of the world.
I'd say that's one thing actually Chinese do pretty well. It's like a copy of the Honda engine all the time. All the Chinese engines I've had have actually been pretty reliable.
The engines are usually the last thing to go wrong with these, because they get thrashed about. You can hold them on at redline all the time and they'll be fine. Even this air-cooled 50cc is always hot after we've gone out for a ride, but it seems to be fine.
I tried to fit an oil cooler on it so it would get slightly cooler, but sadly the oil cooler, they just manufactured it totally wrong, so it was an absolute piece of shit. They'd made it that the oil pressure, you needed so much oil pressure to go through the oil cooler, that these little engines have barely an oil feed that makes the head, so we need to watch out and always check over these Chinese parts, because sometimes we need to either modify them or just double check if they work, because like parts from like your real deal Honda or whatever, they come and they can be immediately bolted on.
But like I said earlier, CF Motor are really coming into the game and they're proving that Chinese engines and build quality can be better. Their goal is more to make a quality machine that then costs less, rather than starting with something that costs less and then building to that budget.
Yeah, I guess that's where one could make Chinese vehicles pretty good, where one has a second like provider who double checks over all the machines and checks if they're up to the build standard or whatever, because from the manufacturer it's just too hard for the Chinese people to double check over if the build quality is good enough, because they're manufacturing at such a high rate.
Yeah, a lot of them, they're getting turned out of the factory like bits of bread. It's unreal.
Exactly.
Keeps the cost down for us as well as the consumer, because we don't have to spend 10,000 on a new dirt bike. We can spend, good, but everybody would rather have one of the big four. We'll put it that way. Nobody goes out of their way to want a Chinese bike, but we don't have 10 grand. Last time I checked, we do not have 10 grand. And so,
unless you subscribe.
Yeah, if you subscribe and we get sponsored, maybe we can make something happen. I think at the point where we can do a giveaway, I think will be great.
Yeah.
Give away a brand new dirt bike is...
It might be a Chinese one though.
It might be, you never know, but I think as a whole, Chinese bikes are lower quality, obviously, than some of the big four, but for starting out, they're not bad. But I think if you're an experienced rider, there's no point buying one. You may as well just spend the extra money, because at the end of the day, you'd rather be out on the trails or on the road than sitting in your garage mending some botched up wiring.
Yeah. Right guys, of course if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, share and comment down below. And if you enjoyed it, please check out these and we'll catch you all next time.
Bye.